A street paved in Portuguese mosaic, and a blue trolley that scratches the stones, as if tracing the final line of a perfect routine. A couple crosses toward tomorrow without haste, their pace dictated by a green notebook and a cheap watch. No one imagines that an iron door just to the side knows how to close off more than an entrance. It knows how to swallow time. Years later, when the neighborhood has worn a new face, the iron groans once more. And what emerges is not noise but a compressed silence. The cobblestone street awakens to the smell of sweet bread and the gentle patter of a drizzle on the school's zinc roof. Alcides checks his simple watch, 3 minutes fast, a habit learned from his shifts at the metalworks. Leonor smooths the hem of her blue floral dress and, with a pencil, confirms the week's shopping list. The navy blue trolley, its wheels checked the night before, waits by the gate like a well-trained dog. The kitchen floor still holds the warmth of freshly brewed coffee, and the house itself seems to hold its breath, preparing for their departure. At 6:15, they lock the door and set off down the pavement, their steps in perfect sync. A slight shift of their shoulders as the street inclines. Donna Noemia, who likes to sweep her pavement early to ward off bad luck, waves and remarks on the drizzle. Leonor offers a closed-lipped smile, adjusts the glasses hanging from their cord, and raises the green notebook as if to show that everything is under control. The market is already claiming the street with its blue, red, and yellow tarps. The smoke from frying pastries, the chop of knives on wooden boards, the rhythmic cries of vendors selling oranges at a fixed price. Agenor, the school's gatekeeper, watches from his green iron shelter and gives a nod. Alcides returns the gesture as he adjusts the trolley's wheel, which has caught on the rain-slicked Portuguese mosaic. They walk slowly, skirting puddles that reflect a banner for the East Side Fair. The first purchases fill the blue fabric, heavy oranges, speckled bananas, damp tomatoes, carrots still clinging to the earth. A head of lettuce drips cold water over the edge of a white bag. His watch gives its customary signal, and Alcides checks the change in his pocket, a gesture more of discipline than necessity. Orlando of the pastel stand raises his spatula in a wave. Leonor signals back. On their way home, no rush. Today they need to find good sardines. The drizzle thickens for a moment, a sharp wind cutting down the street and driving the drops sideways. The vendor, Jadinho, is selling thin plastic raincoats, but the couple prefers to take shelter under the awning of the old market. It's a dark brick building that smells of wet iron. On one side, a heavy door is usually left ajar for vegetable trucks. Domingos, the janitor, is sometimes around, sometimes not, but at this moment no one is there. Alcides holds the trolley near the threshold. Leonor takes the opportunity to shift the bag of oranges to the bottom, a matter of balance. The green notebook, slightly damp at the corner, receives a short line through the word bread. The sounds of the market for some reason seem distant, as if the awning were muffling the voices. The couple takes a breath, 2, 3, and decides to cut through the active part of the market to get back to the main street. The sheet of iron, the kind that runs on a worn track, resists before giving way. The trolley scrapes through, one wheel protesting. The hem of her dress catches on a rough edge. The door slides slowly back into place as if it dislikes being open without an invitation. Inside, the light is poor and the air smells of old dampness. There is a row of open stalls on the active side, but the opposite row ends at a larger, thicker sheet of metal on a crooked track. Alcides gives it a push, just out of his usual curiosity, and the metal answers with a groan of rust and dry grease. They only meant to take a shortcut, 15 steps and done, but a misplaced click transforms the corridor into a dead end. The heavy door, pushed without malice, slides too far and jolts back. The trolley is caught for a second, a wheel knocked askew. Leonor straightens her dress. Alcides murmurs, "Hold on." And together they realize the door has jammed shut. The street is still alive outside, but in here the sound becomes a short echo, like speaking in an old bathroom. They push again, first gently, then with force. The iron only vibrates, refusing to yield. Alcides gets down, trying the track, his fingertips tracing the cold edge. Leonor holds the trolley and looks at her notebook as if an entry there could teach them the way out. The watch insists it is still early. They decide to retreat, to go back around, but the half-wall of brick ends in a blind corner. The awning outside collects water. The drizzle has become a curtain, and the market, though so close, now seems 2 streets away. Alcides calls out, first softly, then with more force. The sound spreads across the metal ceiling and is lost. Leonor sits on the edge of the trolley for a moment to rest her knee, breathes, and stands up carefully. Another attempt at the worn lock wrenches it from the track with a screech that cuts the air like a dull knife. Nothing. She suggests they wait for someone to pass by and hear them. He agrees. For a moment they both lean their foreheads against the door, one at each end, as if the iron were just a wall between 2 rooms in the same house. Time, which until now had obeyed the discipline of the watch, begins to fail. The market continues its rhythm. The oil for the pastries is changed. The potato vendor calls out a new offer. Inside, the light seems to sink into gray. Leonor unwraps the head of lettuce to feel the cool dampness on her hands, an old trick to ward off anxiety. Alcides tries to use the trolley handle as a lever, but the fabric gives way, the metal bends, and the noise they make is too small to cut through the sound of crates being stacked outside. A little later, they think they hear footsteps. They call out again. Nothing. The watch reads a little past 7. Back home, Donna Noemia has already dried her gate and is remarking to her next-door neighbor that the 2 of them will be coming home with rain in their hair. When noon arrives, the neighborhood begins to notice. Orlando's pastries have grown cold, uneaten by Alcides. Their daughter Sonia calls her mother 3 times. Their son Claudio diverts his shared van route to pass by the cobblestone street. The house gate is locked, the spare key still on its hidden nail, untouched. The initial searches check the health clinic, the bus terminal, a quick sweep around the market. Agenor says he saw them pass early on and points the way. Chadinho remembers them under the awning. It is late by the time the police report is filed, and a hastily chosen photograph is turned into a poster, stuck to a pole with transparent tape that won't stick to the damp surface. The sky darkens ahead of schedule, and the mosaic street reflects the yellow glare of headlights as the family begins the first night of a different kind of time. The house is suddenly larger, colder. The wall clock is still 3 minutes fast, and no one has the heart to correct it. On Sunday, the dish towels dry unused, and the coffee loses its aroma before it can be drunk. Sonia opens her mother's drawer and finds old notebooks filled with lists identical to the last, all in pencil. The vowels shaded by someone who presses down hard. In them, there are no clues, only the confirmation of what everyone already knew. Routine method, repetition. Claudio drives with his colleagues from the van service to places where his parents might have gotten confused. He stops by the urgent care clinic with a contained haste, hoping for simple news. A fall, a twisted ankle, any explanation that would restore doors and schedules. Nothing fits. In the afternoon, he returns to the market and looks for Domingos. The janitor, unshaven and with grease-blackened hands, repeats that the old wing is always closed, sometimes used for unloading, but that no one had been in there that Saturday. The manager, Walter, is firm, almost hostile. The decommissioned side has no foot traffic. He has the keys to the padlocks, and that's that. Still, a search is authorized. Flashlight beams sweep across the active ground floor. Shadows stretch along the walls. The rising dust smells sweet, like overripe melon, and at the far end, the heavier door, the one on the crooked track. With no clear sign of a break-in, the patrol ends as it began, with empty phrases meant to comfort. On Monday, the street awakens studded with posters. The photo of the two is from an old birthday, a lopsided smile and a well-pressed shirt. A boy on a bicycle offers to help. A young woman from the butcher shop takes 2 copies for the bus stop. Neighbors take turns answering the gate. Collecting news that is almost always just rumors born and dying on the same street corner. Inside the house, the bed and table hold the objects that should have returned in their hands. The cloth bag Leonor used for bread, Alcides' timid umbrella tucked away because the evening mist wasn't heavy enough to warrant it. At night, Sônia says in a low voice that maybe someone took the shopping cart, and the parents with it. Cláudio, who feels he must answer everything with the courage of an eldest son, assures her that no, nothing fits that hypothesis. The hours that follow drag on as if the entire neighborhood were walking through water. The days turn into a week. The case loses volume in sidewalk conversations but remains, like an air bubble beneath a coat of paint. The market continues to operate as it always has, the bent track of its rolling door groaning at the slightest touch, with no one having the time to fix it. A discreet report years later will recommend a partial closure due to old installations and makeshift wiring. From 1999, 2000, 2001, the family lives behind closed doors and in silence. The couple's house is left as it was, aprons on their hooks, the backyard plants asking for just the right amount of water. The wall clock remains stubbornly 3 minutes fast, and this detail becomes a way of speaking to those who are not there. The great expanse of time settles in, demanding new arrangements. Sônia stores Leonor's dresses in plastic bags but leaves a blue cotton one hanging, unable to explain why. Cláudio begins calling the same people again, as if the answers might change from one year to the next. Sometimes, lacking the courage to enter the market, he just stands across the street and listens to the sound of crates, trying to pick out, from the mass of noises, a single familiar call. The neighborhood expands. New buildings surround the Portuguese mosaic sidewalks, and the street market gains stalls with speakers playing country songs with short choruses. The memory of the two blends into the landscape, like a shadow you only see when the sun hits at a specific angle. In 2007, a short circuit in the market's idle wing darkens the walls and ceilings. It's not a fire that draws trucks and onlookers, it's a sharp crack followed by smoke that stains everything with a fine soot. Technicians disconnect part of the circuit and recommend leaving it alone. Thick dust sticks to every surface. The metal ceiling loses its shine and the door on the bent track begins to complain, with a harsher sound as if spitting sand. Outside, no one connects the soot with what was lost. Inside their homes, the story of the disappearance becomes a kind of legend, without ghosts, only facts, times, names, and that one detail they passed under the awning. The following years pile up with the same precision as a pencil-marked ledger. Sônia develops a habit of visiting the market street every 2 months, buying oranges, and returning along the same path from that morning in '98. Cláudio gets married, moves 3 neighborhoods away, but keeps the spare key hanging on a hidden nail untouched like a promise. Sometimes when he returns, the memory tightens like a wet shoe. The market ages even more. Damp stains draw maps on the bricks. A poorly made weld appears on the corner of an iron door. The handrail grows smooth from countless hands. The deactivated wing becomes a rumor. There's old stuff in there, a worn-out feeling not worth the cost of repairs, And that is precisely why, in 2017, when the city announces it will renovate the building, almost no one believes the promises of new lights, fresh paint, and open corridors will ever leave the paper. October arrives with a washed, clean sky and the smell of earth after the first spring rain. The construction crew parks their truck beside the market, unloading a hydraulic jack, saws, and cans of penetrating oil. The foreman measures the jammed rolling door, notes the misalignment with a pencil tucked behind his ear, and decides they will attack it in stages. Outside, the market sets up as always, but the dominant sound is different now. Iron scraping against iron, bolts surrendering, cracks that travel across the ceiling and reverberate through the warehouse. Old dust stirs from the corners like a timid animal, drawing beams in the air. When the first spray of lubricant spreads, its sweet smell mixes with that of wet rust, reminiscent of an old workshop on a summer day. The door does not want to obey. The track, bent ever since someone hit it with the weight of the world, holds the door fast as if it has developed a memory. One of the workers, a young man with broad shoulders, engages the jack. He turns it slowly, forcing the structure to yield by millimeters. The sound is a deep lament, a complaint that seems to rise from the floor itself. Someone comments that it hasn't been opened since the 80s. Another says he walked past it as a child holding his mother's hand and remembers being afraid of the darkness in that wing. The morning light enters through the opening, drawing a pale rectangle on the dust as if marking a page in a forgotten book. Two men hold the edge with thick gloves. Another plants his foot and pushes with his whole body. For an instant, nothing moves. Then the door gives a hand's breadth, retreats 2 fingers, and advances again in a rough dance. The foreman orders them to stop, adjust the jack, and repeat. With each advance, the gap gains its own voice, breathing an air that has not circulated for a very long time. The silence that comes from within has a density. It feels like something you could touch. A current of cold air escapes, as if the space sealed in it exists in another season. When the opening is wide enough for a shoulder, the flashlights are switched on. White beams scan the cracked cement floor, climb the soot-darkened bricks, and hit a metal ceiling ribbed with old smoke. The suspended dust glitters in points, as if tiny grains are discovering light for the first time. The first step inside makes a dry crack. Whoever enters smells iron, dust, and something burnt long ago. It is not the stench of recent abandonment. It is memory made tangible. The circle of light illuminating the center of the space finds it, propped in a corner, a familiar object, deformed. A blue shopping cart, now a mere skeleton of its frame. The canvas has faded to a dirty gray, torn into strips that sway slightly as someone passes. One of the wheels is off its axle, the rim twisted, the rubber eaten away by time. On the floor, old bags, their colors dead and plastic dry as onion skin, hold volumes that were once fruit. A shrunken orange, a bit of tomato, a crooked carrot, all in a dark ochre that recalls not a market but a cellar. No one speaks the name forming in each of their minds. The foreman raises his flashlight and sweeps the opposite corner. Against the wall, the shape of a body reduced to its essence, a skeleton, sitting, with thin arms resting on the floor. What remains of a blue fabric that once had flowers. The light moves slightly and reveals near the door another outline interrupted on the ground. Ribs turned to the side, a pelvis pointing toward the opening, toward escape. The shadow of a shirt that has survived in strips. The air, which before seemed merely old, suddenly weighs on the chest as if the room itself is asking for respect. One of the workers takes 2 steps back without realizing it, bumps into the door and almost closes it again. Outside, the market goes on. Oranges are cut for tasting, a child asks for a pastry, a light drizzle returns, and the Portuguese mosaic receives drops that gather like glass. Here inside, time stopped in an interrupted gesture. The flashlight fixes on a point showing halfway between the cart and the corner, something darkened, soaked by decades. It is a thin notebook, its spine open as if it gave up in the middle of a note. The light trembles slightly. The foreman, a man not usually at a loss for words, lets out a quiet, "Call the person in charge." His voice smaller than his body. The phone goes to his ear. There are instructions: isolate, do not touch, wait. The market's main gate closes slowly. The noise from within is replaced by the silence of a stopped workshop. Those present understand without needing to be told that this room is no ordinary construction site discovery. It is history. It is the sum of a bent track, a heavy door, and a sequence of minutes that no one noticed when they needed to. The dust which before danced chaotically in the light now seems to fall slowly, respecting the scene. The men step back, some leaning their backs against the cold brick to catch their breath as if they had been running. The gap remains, guarding the initial image. A toppled cart, fabrics in tatters, two human forms, waiting for those who will come to measure and to name. The noise of the construction ceases as if someone had turned down the volume on the neighborhood. Yellow tape cordons off the opening. Two orange cones announce that from this point on, every step is measured. The technicians wear simple overalls, latex gloves, clipboards tucked under their arms. The first order is not to move anything on the floor. Flashlights, then photos, then a tape measure. The still air gives back dust with every breath, and the light cuts the soot with sharp edges. One of the experts kneels on the cement and calibrates the distance between the base of the door and the warped track. The measurement confirms what the ear already knew. The door had not run freely for years, perhaps decades. In the corner, the tatters of the blue dress hold just enough islands of color for memory to recognize the pattern of tiny flowers the neighborhood had learned to associate with Leonor. Near the exit, the strips of the darkened shirt cling to ribs like wet paper drying on a wall. The cart, for its part, seems to have given up on standing, lying on its side with its handle bent and its torn pockets showing old stuffing. The camera pans over the desiccated bags without touching them. The remains of fruits and vegetables have become brittle sculptures, their colors reduced to a spectrum of ochres and blacks. No one there uses big words to explain it. One technician simplifies: little air, low humidity, the alternation of heat and cold, the soot deposited years later from the short circuit. All of it helped to dry, to preserve what would normally rot. There are no flies, no active smell, only dust and iron. On the floor, between the cart and the corner, the green cover of the notebook appears, transformed into thin leather. Its pages are stuck together in a way that only water and time can achieve. The spine has given way, the writing turned to shadow. Even so, everyone understands what it is without needing to open it. The position of the bones tells a story without a scream. The male figure has fallen sideways, an arm extended toward the track, fingers that no longer exist pointing to what had always been the way out. The female figure is propped against the walls as if conserving energy, knees slightly apart, spine supported by the cold brick. The heel bones hold the memory of a cheap sandal, its buckle swallowed by rust. An expert notes that there are no cuts, no punctures, no marks to indicate violence by a third party. Outside, a few curious onlookers try to crane their necks. They are dismissed with polite firmness. A white car pulls up to the curb and the current administrator gets out. He signs the temporary closure order and tries to avoid looking inside. He knows, because he worked there for years, that the door was never a priority. The proper authorities are notified. There is no televised urgency. The rhythm is that of people who must ensure nothing is lost. The remains are mapped with letters and numbers on small plastic markers, photographed more than once under varying light to check for shadows. The tape measures from the door to the cart, from the cart to the corner, from the corner to the door frame. On the track, the dented curve receives special attention. A technician puts his ear close and asks them to push it a centimeter. The sound confirms it is jammed by misalignment, no trick to it. The floor bears the marks of old puddles, small impressions from a drizzle that once got in and never left. The image composes a scene both banal and devastating. Ordinary people trapped by tired architecture and accumulated neglect. Claudio answers the phone late in the afternoon and doesn't at first understand the agent's words, spoken slowly, asking that the family come to the market calmly with someone they trust for support. Sônia gets the news on the bus. She changes seats, holding back tears like someone holding water in their mouth. They arrive as the sky is already losing its color. They don't go in. They stand at the edge of the tape. From a distance, they recognize the silhouette of the bluish toppled cart and the bags that look like thin fossils. Sônia brings a hand to her mouth when a flashlight finds the notebook. Claudio has to lean against the wall to steady his legs. There is no scene of hysteria, no screaming, because what washes over them is a different kind of impact. The confirmation of an absence that has lasted longer than any human prediction. The dental forensics days later will compare the teeth with outpatient records kept on brown paper. Sônia provides a photo of Leonor smiling, and Claudio remembers that his father lost a molar in the 80s and never replaced it. The information matches the skeletal structures. The notebook, still sealed like a wet stone, reinforces the case through context. This is not about a final judgment. It is about protocol combined with material elements that, together, provide enough certainty to give back their names. The report will state that the scene is consistent with accidental imprisonment, absence of assault, and death by progressive exhaustion and dehydration in a confined environment. No one writes the word fate. On the stamp, there are dates and signatures. In the air, the same smell of dust that seeps into clothes and doesn't come out in the first wash. The news travels through the neighborhood without a megaphone. It arrives the way grave things do, from mouth to mouth, carried by those who prefer to lower their voice. Donna Noemia turns on the living room light earlier than usual and sits in the armchair, her hand resting flat on her knee. She remembers the sight of the two of them turning the corner on that damp morning. Orlando from the pastry stand switches off his griddle for a moment and looks at the market's awning, now sealed with crisscross tape. Jadinho, who once sold thin raincoats in the drizzle, gives his statement about the instant he saw the couple under the side entrance. His account, cross-referenced with the timeline, draws a straight line to the jammed door. There are no dramatic gaps, only prosaic variables. An untimely rain, a crooked track, the noise of the street fair swallowing a shout, poor lighting, the practical idea of taking a shortcut. With the area cordoned off, a second team returns for a methodical sweep. They look for tool marks, scratches that are not from natural wear, signs of a break-in. They find only what was expected: old rust, dust accumulated over years, soot from the short circuit in 2007. The lock is mechanical, not symbolic. The technicians test the hypothesis that someone from the outside pushed the heavy door shut. Gravity itself, combined with the uneven ground, explains how it settled. The dynamic reconstruction then takes shape. The couple enters to take shelter from the rain. The door slides a little too far, then jolts back. The wheel of their shopping cart catches for a moment. A quick correction pulls the door inward. It snags in the track like a stubborn drawer. From that point on, every subsequent movement is an attempt to undo a mistake made in seconds. Claudio follows the investigation when he can. He listens intently to every verb describing what his parents might have done in those first few hours. Push, call out, rest, try again. The image of the male skeleton's outstretched arm near the exit returns every night, a tape that will not rewind. Sônia, for her part, fixes her gaze on the tattered dress on the islands of flowers that survived. She doesn't need to open the notebook to know that one of the entries read "bread," and that Leonor had likely jotted it down with a quick, short stroke. The report arrives, and with it the recommendation for a routine burial. The family decides on a simple farewell, with no procession, no eulogy. A neighborhood priest offers his silent presence, and they accept the gesture alone, without symbols spoken aloud. In the days before the funeral, their parents' house is open to the sun. The smell of wet earth from the yard drifts in through the windows. Sonia slowly folds the towels, runs her hand over the hanging aprons, and puts away half a dozen trinkets that have lost the one who would move them from place to place. Cláudio takes the clock off the wall, resets the 3 minutes it ran fast, and hangs it back on the nail. A chasm of silence opens in the kitchen when the second hand begins to move again. He walks down the hall, touches the corner of the table as his father used to, and realizes the gesture is now his own. The burial takes place on a morning without drizzle. The earth is damp from the previous day's rain. Few people attend, just enough for the names to be spoken without a microphone. A cemetery worker is careful with the numbered boxes. Sonia slips a small piece of the notebook into her pocket. It had come loose during the forensic analysis and was given to her as a formalized memento. There are no banners, no posters, no performative indignation. There is exhaustion and the strange gratitude of finally having a place. Afterward, on the way back, they pass the market. The jammed door is now open under watch. The wind circulates through the darkened wings, stirring up the smell of iron and old dust. Cláudio stops in front of the Portuguese mosaic tiles and thinks, without saying it, that sometimes life is just a sequence of details that no one ever checks. The city moves forward with its plan to transform the building. The renovation will have to respect both memory and the official findings, preserving the record of the crooked track and a section of the floor with the marks from the cart. Not as a solemn memorial, but as a slice of urban history. Domingos, the old janitor, shows up one weekday, rests his hand on the brick, and stays there for a few minutes. He always knew that door was trouble, but he never imagined this. When journalists seek out statements, the neighborhood responds without adjectives. The case does not become a spectacle because there are no clear villains, no magical solutions. It was just a chain of errors that took 19 years to be understood. In time, the market will once again sell oranges, tomatoes, and bread. Those who pass by will feel a slight freshness in the air near the entrance, because now the circulation works, and that is enough. Months later, the machines return with a different purpose. The task is no longer to open what was closed, but to rebuild without erasing. Men sand the soot from the ribs of the metal ceiling. Others treat the exposed brick with a pressure washer. The difference in color between the old and the clean forms a kind of map of time. On the floor, engineers mark off a rectangle of cement with tape. It will preserve, exactly as it was found, the imprint of the crooked wheel in 2 straight lines like the tracks of a cart. A small, discreet plaque, they promise, will say only, "Wing reopened in 2017. Structure maintained as a safety record. No photographs of the couple, no red arrows, nothing to entertain the curious." The idea is to remember without exposing, to teach without turning pain into a spectacle. Sonia watches the construction when she can. Sometimes she walks slowly down the corridor that once held a compressed slants and tries to imagine her mother sitting, conserving her energy, the way she did when her knee acted up. She holds on to the idea that in there, despite the likely panic of the first few hours, there must have been moments of quiet conversation, of repeated plans, of counting how many steps were left to the corner. Cláudio, more practical, offers to help take what was left of the cart to the municipal depot. A technician explains that part of it has been archived for study, and the rest will be discarded. The blue fabric, now a coarse lace of dust and fiber, disintegrates at the slightest touch. He avoids touching it. The neighborhood moves through the process in its own way. A new bakery opens on the corner, displaying an old photograph of the area without a sentimental caption. The doorman, Agenor, nearing retirement, comments that the street is busy again, but that many people slow their pace as they pass the reopened entrance. It isn't fear. It's an automatic adjustment of respect. On Saturdays, when the street fair is in full swing, the vendors' calls soften near the market, a collective reflex. They speak more quietly, a brief pause between prices and waits. One day, a summer rain comes down hard. The roof answers with the sound of drumming on tin, and anyone nearby recognizes the familiar music, only now the echo doesn't swallow voices. At home, Sônia decides what to do with the clothes. The blue dress that was left hanging goes into a cardboard box with a simple label. She goes down to the yard with a basin and waters the plants with the same steady hand she learned from her mother. The mud on her feet makes the soles of her shoes feel heavy. In the late afternoon, she sits on the step and opens the salvaged notebook, which she hadn't yet found the courage to touch. The pages are stuck together, but a dry edge allows her to see graphite strokes that have become smudges. On one page, with patience and slanted light, the word sardines is just visible. It is enough to rearrange an entire memory. Saturday morning, the smell of fresh fish from the stall. Leonor haggling over the price with someone who knew her by name. Cláudio, for his part, goes back to driving his commuter van on the route that passes the school. Sometimes, in the early morning, he turns down the radio and lets the city's own sounds take over. When he passes the new banner for the East Side sale, he feels a kind of internal adjustment, like when the bus hits a slight dip in the road and realigns itself. At night, he stops by his sister's house, fixes a socket that kept sparking, and leaves eating a still warm bread roll. Life reassumes its place without fanfare. In his pocket, his parents' spare key still hangs on the ring. Not out of necessity, but out of habit. When the reopening is made official, a small group walks through the restored corridor. The current manager follows protocol, thanks the team, and speaks of the importance of training staff on opening and closing procedures. An inspector jots down maintenance deadlines so that tracks will not learn to jam again. Sônia and Cláudio stay in the back, not wanting to be the center of anything. A city official, without improvisation, asks for a minute of silence. The noise of the street fair flows in through the door, bounces off the new walls, and exits through the other side like wind that has found its path. The afternoon light pours through the opening and draws a bright stripe across the preserved rectangle of the floor. There, where the wheel once stopped, footsteps now instinctively avoid. The building serves the city again, its lesson absorbed, invisible like all the things that, when they work, no one remembers. And that, in the end, is its own quiet form of care. In the first report, the family reads calmly. An engineer describes the door as a sheet of iron with a memory. It is not a figure of speech. The crooked track, fed by years of clumsy shoves, had learned to always return to the same point like tired elastic. She demonstrates on site with the door now freed. It only takes one extra push for the weight to shift and for gravity to finish the job. The sound, as it slides, vibrates through the zinc ceiling and becomes an indistinct noise outside. Especially on the morning of a street fair. Cláudio hears this and imagines his father calling for help in that clipped voice of his, the voice of someone who doesn't like to bother anyone. The engineer continues. In an environment like that, with no windows and double doors, an echo doesn't carry far. It folds in on itself and dies against the wall, like water hitting stone. The reconstruction of those first few minutes becomes a continuous line. The couple enters to take shelter. The cart's wheel catches on the edge. The correction pulls the door inward. The track swallows it. They try the handle. They feel the resistance. Alcides, accustomed to machinery, looks for a weak point in the metal. He tries to use the cart's handle as a lever. Leonor, who solves what she can with calm, spares her knee and measures her strength, sitting for moments before starting again. Between attempts, they call out. The fair around them is a sea of sound. Hawkers' cries, crates being moved, hot oil sizzling, truck engines, laughter. A firm call for help does not become news. The experts avoid embellishment, explaining that with no trauma to the bones, no signs of restraint, no external marks. The strongest hypothesis is accidental imprisonment. The position of the male body, facing the exit, arm outstretched, is consistent with someone persisting in the most obvious direction. The position of the female body seated suggests a strategy to survive longer, to alternate between effort and rest. A second report signed by a specialist in decomposition describes the site as an environment of low relative humidity with a later deposit of soot. The technical term is lost on the family, who translate it for themselves. It was a dry place that didn't let them rot like you see on the news. It let them dry out until they became something else. Sônia thinks of the notebook again. She carefully asks to see the darkened volume once more. A technician shows her under a slanted light how the graphite has become a shadow, but still left a raised trace. They don't attempt a full reading. They accept that one salvaged word, sardines, carries the rest of the list as if it were a password. The water-damaged page feels heavy, as if holding old water. Sônia holds it with both hands as one would receive a photograph. The statements of former market-goers help fill in the gaps. Agenor confirms the time. Orlando talks about the puddle they had to walk around. Jadinho insists on his memory of the awning. Domingos, the janitor, admits that sometimes the side entrance was left unsupervised on busy days. He says the key was passed around among those who needed to unload goods. It is not a confession seeking blame. It is routine admitting its own flaws. Walter, the manager in '98, signs a statement that he never saw the need for rigorous maintenance on that door. The priority was always the active side, the side that made money, that welcomed the public. The sentences emerge without malice, but with weight. The family decides to write down their own memories of that day. Sônia narrates the morning she couldn't find her mother and the phone remained silent. Their brother Pedro writes about the wet lamppost where he taped up her photo, post 3 or 4, with tape that wouldn't stick. Cláudio writes about driving his van in circles, looking for his parents as if they were late passengers. They don't intend to publish it. They keep it in a brown envelope for a future that might ask. The envelope is placed in the same drawer where Leonor kept her notebooks, a drawer now filled with a silence that has lost its sharp edge. It is less an acute pain and more a weariness, like when a fine rain seeps into your clothes and you only notice it at the end of the day. At the market, the space begins to change its role. The forensic experts conclude their fieldwork. The new signs are affixed and the workers return, respecting the preserved rectangle of floor. The smell of construction materials fills the air, mixed with the old dust that still insists on rising from the cracks. One morning, the wind rushes through the entire building, creating a pleasant current. Someone comments that now it can breathe. On the street, a car passes with a quiet loudspeaker selling oranges at a fixed price. The call echoes differently, hitting the restored wall and returning clear. It is curious how the sound, which once swallowed cries for help, now returns voices whole. Sônia and Cláudio, little by little, learn to visit without being wounded. They don't stop at the corner where their mother was found. They prefer to look from a distance, to let the light tell the story. A new market employee, who never knew the couple, approaches them carefully. She thanks them for allowing the building to tell its story of failure. She says it prevents others. Sônia nods, offering no speech. Cláudio, never one for long explanations, answers with a clipped yes, a sound of both consent and conclusion. The city spins around them as they walk home slowly, feeling the wind slice across the avenue and dry the sweat from their necks. When the full report arrives, its technical language strives for a sterile precision, a language grounded in fact. Taphonomy explains what happened to each object, as if translating a dictionary of time itself. Cotton fabrics survive as mere threads because they dry out. Synthetic fibers break down. A plastic bag becomes a hard, yellowed shell. Fruit loses its water until only a shrunken body remains, hollowed out. Soot clings and darkens everything, like an unintentional coat of paint. There is no exact dating of the final moment. Only a probable window, counted in hours or a few days after the lock engaged. It is difficult to accept because it is too simple. The expert signs off that the body of evidence points to death by dehydration, exhaustion, and perhaps mild hypothermia during the first few nights, given the cold of the floor and the thermal conductivity of the cement. The paper feels nothing, but the person reading it does. Sônia seeks out a psychologist at the local clinic. It's not that the ground has fallen out from under her, but that her head sometimes spins, especially when she passes the school and sees its green gate. She describes her neighborhood as a place that folds in on itself, repeating corners and voices until her body begs for a pause. The therapist suggests discreet rituals, tending to plants, walking through the street market, accepting that returning to the market will, once again, become part of her routine. In cases like this, rituals serve as a steadying rail. Cláudio chooses a different kind of track. He helps the union organize a small campaign among drivers about checking doors and emergency exits at terminals. He doesn't speak of his parents at the microphone. He speaks of noises, of how a loud sound can swallow a plea for help, of how a checklist, a word with no charm, prevents tragedy. At the house on Cobblestone Street, the seasons begin to mark a rhythm again. The heat makes the living room smell of dry cloth. The first summer rain brings a quick, vibrant green back to the backyard soil. In the bottom of a drawer, Sônia finds photos from the beach, of Leonor wearing a straw hat and a smile without her glasses. There is no melodrama. She places the photos on the table, wipes the glass of a frame, and chooses one to keep on the bookshelf. Beside it, she keeps the box with the piece of the notebook. The pencil has faded to a shadow, but it is a shadow that speaks loudly. At the market, a public school biology teacher brings his students to see the restored wing. He doesn't turn the visit into a spectacle. He speaks softly, like someone telling a story in a whisper. About how enclosed spaces can become traps, about how the city accumulates small defects that, when added together, weigh more than an isolated accident. About respecting the details, a lock, a track, a warning sign. In the end, the young people walk through the corridor in a short line, silent for a minute. No one records it with a phone. The administration asked them to hold on to the experience more than the image. The memory of 2007 returns like a piece of a puzzle fitting into place far too late. The short circuit that stained the walls with soot had also darkened clothes and bones. It also added a ceiling layer to the narrative. The soot is as fine as flour. It sticks and does not let go. It unintentionally helped with preservation. A technician, with the voice of someone who enjoys explaining things, says that soot acts like a blanket that doesn't warm, but insulates. Sônia thinks about how the world sometimes conspires against our desires. adding up small misfortunes that only make sense much later. Claudio makes a practical decision. Selling their parents' house is not in the plans. He and his sister agree to keep the space as it is, without sanctifying it, without turning it into a time capsule. Well-tended plants, a fresh coat of paint from time to time, the clock now set to the correct time. On Saturdays, they both continue to shop at the same street market. The cart they use is new, also blue with sturdy wheels. It squeaks every now and then, and the sound, though a reminder, no longer wounds. A vendor insists they stop for a pastel. They stop. The oil crackles, the dough puffs up, and the smell of fried pastry brings back a kind of old-fashioned joy, simple and good. When the city hall schedules the final ceremony for the market's reopening, it is late afternoon. The Sao Paulo sky takes on that fleeting orange band. A local singer starts a quiet samba, no speakers, just voice and a cavaquinho, and the arrangement respects the place. The secretary's speech avoids budget figures. It talks about training teams for opening and closing, about checking the tracks, about noting in spreadsheets what turns and what jams. Sônia and Cláudio are in the back, holding small cups of water. They are not the protagonists of anything there. They are a presence, the presence that gives it all meaning. Afterward, they walk through the restored corridor. The preserved section of the floor still bears the marks of the wheels. Two parallel lines burned into the cement. Sônia runs her hand through the air above the rectangle without touching it. It is a gesture that disturbs nothing, but accepts what remains. The neighborhood relearns how to live with the building. Early on Saturday, the stalls are set up as always, but with a new carefulness next to the reopened wing. Vendors comment that the wind there runs differently, cooler, like a bus corridor when all the windows are open. The light entering through the large door draws a pale carpet to the center of the hall. And when a sheet of newspaper flies by, it stops right at the edge of the preserved rectangle, as if respecting an invisible boundary. Children pull on their parents' hands to ask what it is. The explanation is spare, a warning, not an attraction. The old-timers who followed the searches back in '98 retell their memories without searching for heroism. Dona Noemia says the absence was a smell inside her house, a pot that never came to a boil. Janor points from his stall to the exact line the two used to walk, and how on that day their pace seemed slower because of the drizzle. Orlando, his grill sizzling, comments that he never again failed to check the side door before flipping his first pastry. The gesture has become a good habit. Hardim, who now only comes with his wares when it's truly raining, sometimes leans against the brick wall and stays silent, as if reciting to himself the script of misfortune that could have been avoided with a better fit, an iron wedge, one more turn of a key. In discreet meetings, the current administrator and the employees agree on routines. No lists on the wall, no posters, just ingrained habits. Whoever closes checks twice. Whoever opens runs the entire track. Any unusual noise becomes a call for maintenance. Once, on a Tuesday, the door on the other side squeaked. Within half an hour, someone showed up with grease, a tape measure, and the will not to put it off. It's not a heroic act, it's maintenance. The city doesn't usually applaud such things, but it's what holds the tide. Sônia continues to go to the market. Some Saturdays she buys sardines, almost as a tribute. On others, she walks right past because life demands tomatoes and bread. On the way back, the Portuguese mosaic sidewalks still reflect puddles when it rains. The same pattern she has known since she was a girl. The smell of chopped onions mixes with that of fruit, and one vendor's call crosses over another's, creating a market melody that always ends in much the same way. She sometimes notices people looking at her with a mixture of recognition and care. The scene. She responds, "Good morning," and moves on. She doesn't want to be remembered only for a tragedy. She wants to be remembered as someone who walks steadily and pays with the right change. Claudio, steering wheel in hand, takes the avenue in heavy traffic and thinks less about the past. The job demands his attention, and he allows it. When he passes the market, it's a split-second glance away. That's all. At night, he returns to his sister's house with bags of oranges and coffee, because he knows that on Sunday they will sit in the backyard and talk about their parents without the air growing heavy. The wind moves the leaves of a snake plant that Leonor planted and which never died. Resilient, like simple things that don't need much to keep going. A reporter from a neighborhood newspaper tries to write a long feature. He asks for interviews, photos, detailed memories. Sonia politely declines. She says they have spoken enough that now the story belongs to the city in a different way. As a reminder, not a soap opera. He understands, thanks her, and publishes a proper article without sensational phrases. The public comments little. The case doesn't disappear, but it doesn't become anyone's weapon either. It remains like a scar. It doesn't hurt every day, but it explains something when touched. Sometimes visitors from other regions pass through the wing. One of them, an old man who worked for years in a factory, stands before the crooked track. He says he's seen a lot of metal develop a bad habit. He says that machines, too, get into the habit of running wrong if no one corrects them. The common remark hits home. The carelessness that killed Alcides and Leonor is no different from that which runs through poorly laid wires and doors that don't close properly. It is the sum of small nothings. The difference is that there, the nothingness exacted a high price and was left exposed for a long time in a closed-off void. One late afternoon, Sônia and Cláudio decide to have a small gathering at home. They don't invite many people, only those who were there for the first posters back in '98. They put coffee on the table, a simple cake, bread and butter. They talk about their parents, recalling small details. Alcides' habit of setting the clock 3 minutes fast. The way Leonor would wipe her hand on her apron before making a note in her booklet. They laugh at things that can now be laughed at. When night falls, the cobblestone street takes on that glow from the lampposts that looks like rain even when it isn't. They say their goodbyes on the sidewalk with short hugs and promises to see each other at the market. Life returns to its shape, but with a permanent detour, an attention to things that squeak. The market, now well lit and ventilated, continues to serve the city. In the preserved corner, the mark of the wheel and the strip of sunlight occasionally compose an unintentionally beautiful image. It is not a tribute. It is just light meeting matter in the right way. For those who know, it tells a story. For those who don't, it's a detail on the floor, and perhaps that is the best fate for a story like this. To exist in the everyday, to teach without a lecture, to remind without wounding, to make someone, pushing a heavy door, think twice before letting it swing free. The registry office issues the delayed death certificate with the sobriety of papers that arrive when the matter has already become a weary memory. Identification is listed as confirmed by dental records in context. Location, as the deactivated wing of the municipal market. Probable cause, a combination of dehydration and exhaustion. Sônia reads it slowly, her finger tracing each line as she used to do with recipes. Cláudio signs with the metalworker's script he inherited from his father. A heavy stroke, without flourish. They walk out into the corridor and breathe an air that smells of archive dust. The world of file cabinets that holds the stories of ordinary people. On the way back, the bus brakes in the rain and the sound of a wet tire on the asphalt sticks in the memory, like the soundtrack to this silent chapter. At home, Routine brings everything back into focus. Sonia moves the aspirin into the kitchen drawer. She folds towels, consecrates Saturday with the smell of fresh coffee and still warm bread. Claudio installs a new latch on the backyard door and checks it twice. A good habit, learned by contrast. The wall clock keeps the correct time, but every time it strikes 6:15, they both feel a tightening, quick and respectful, like the discreet touch of someone entering a room and asking permission. Some neighbors ask if they plan to move. The answer is no. The house is not a museum, but it has become a fixed point on a compass, an address that organizes the rest. The market on the other side has already hosted its first fairs since the reopening. The washed floor gives off a dull sheen. The preserved wing always seems colder, as if the bricks hold a private winter inside. Maintenance workers have become a common sight, with grease in their pockets and spray cans in hand. No one is bothered by this. On the contrary, there is a relief in seeing small precautions repeated until they become habit. When a vendor's call gets too loud, someone naturally lowers their voice. When the rain beats down on the zinc roof, the sound is heavy, a shared memory. But now it doesn't frighten. Sonia receives a visit from a teacher at the public school. She wants to know if the class can write letters to Alcides and Leonor, an exercise in empathy in the city. Sonia thinks it's beautiful. She accepts. She only asks that the letters remain at the school without public display. Months later, the teacher delivers discreet copies on a lined sheet of paper. A student writes, "Donna Leonor, my grandmother also uses a green notebook. I will take care of the door to our house." On another, a boy draws a blue cart and two parallel lines. Sonia puts them all in the same drawer as the notebooks, like someone planting a seed to harvest its shade later. Claudio, for his part, starts giving rides from time to time to Domingos, the old janitor who lives 2 streets up. During the short drive, they talk about the rain, the Wednesday soccer game, the price of gas. One day, Domingos confesses that he sometimes dreams of the door sliding shut on its own. Claudio doesn't sour the subject. He says he dreams too, but in his dream the door opens and stays that way. They sit in silence until the traffic light. On green, each goes his own way, and the weight of that conversation dissolves into the city noise like sugar in hot water. On a sunny Saturday, Sonia decides to cook sardines the way her mother used to, in the oven with tomato, onion, and lemon. The smell fills the house and escapes onto the street. Donna Noemia claps at the gate and asks for a little if there's any left over. They eat together on the veranda, feeling the wind billow the thin curtain. They talk of plants, of a new remedy for knee pain, of the rising price of carrots. The conversation skirts the central issue, never quite landing on it. It's a form of respect they both have learned, to live with the story without serving it up on a plate every day. The memory of the discovery returns in flashes, less cutting now. Sometimes when the afternoon light spills down the market corridor, tracing a line over the preserved rectangle of floor, Sonia thinks about the almost capsule-like nature of that space. There was no mystery demanding grand theories, there was a sum of small failures. A bent track, a heavy door, a noise that swallowed voices, an awning that promised shelter and exacted a heavy price. She repeats to herself that accepting the simplicity of the cause is different from minimizing its gravity. Understanding doesn't heal, but it organizes. The city is learning too. A quick course on urban equipment safety now includes the East Zone market among its examples. It's noteworthy that no one involved sought fame. The case became a quiet reference point. How do you prevent a door from becoming a lid? How do you train people to hear an abnormal sound? How do you maintain a routine of checks without relying on goodwill? It's a map of small decisions that, when added up, keep life upright. In the end, it's what Leonor did with her notebook and what Alcides did with his watch. Method. In the late afternoon, when the sky turns a leaden gray and the wind lifts newspapers from the ground, Sônia calmly closes the windows and checks the latch. Cláudio sends a message. "I'll swing by early tomorrow." She replies with an orange emoji. The silence that follows isn't empty. It's a house full of things done. Outside, the neighborhood turns on its lights with the naturalness of having survived another day. And the market 2 blocks away breathes like a building that has learned to open and close according to what life demands. There are days when Sônia wakes before the alarm, while it's still dark and feels the house breathing with her. She makes coffee and listens to the first bus scoring the asphalt, a low rumble that mixes with the whistling of the wind at the gate. She remembers her father setting his watch 3 minutes fast, so he wouldn't be late for his shift at the metalworks. She remembers her mother sharpening pencils in the yard, the shavings falling into a small plastic pot. These are memories that don't hurt, they comfort. She picks up the recovered notebook and, even without being able to read it, knows that Saturday's list by heart. Oranges, bananas, tomatoes, carrots, lettuce, bread, sardines, coffee. The list becomes a secular prayer, a way to organize the mind when it thinks too much. One Sunday, with no fares to drive, Cláudio decides to retrace the entire path, step by step, as if sketching a map with his feet. He leaves the house at 6:15, turns the corner where Dona Noemia used to sweep, passes the school gate and greets the janitor who now works part-time. He crosses the Portuguese mosaic tiles, dodging imaginary puddles even on a dry day, walks past Orlando's newsstand and the memory of a wave. He stops under the side awning and takes a deep breath. The door now slides smoothly. He goes inside, rests his palm on the cold brick, and for a second feels the weight of one who tried and failed. He doesn't cry. He just closes his eyes and gives thanks for finally having a place to lean his longing against, without it collapsing. The new market manager, attentive, keeps his promise. Every month, a technician measures the track's clearance, lubricates it, and signs a report that doesn't get lost in a drawer. Sometimes engineering students visit the site to see up close how a prosaic problem became a tragedy. No one takes smiling selfies. There is a collective, hard-to-explain respect. It's as if the entire city, for a few minutes, shifts gears and moves at an observer's pace. Even the Saturday vendors in this section seem to call out their prices politely, their voices measured. Their house on the cobblestone street remains a safe harbor. Sônia repaints the window frames, plants basil in an old can, hangs laundry on the line and smells the soap mixed with the damp earth. At night, she listens to the rain drumming on the zinc roof and finds the sound pleasing. Cláudio brings a new light bulb for the kitchen, installs it, and throws out the old wiring that crackled at the flip of a switch. They laugh at themselves, at a pot forgotten on the stove, at a cat that jumps the neighbor's wall and knocks over a vase. Life, despite everything, finds room to be light. One afternoon, Sônia accepts an invitation to speak to a small group of community agents at the local clinic. She brings no photos, no papers, only the story told in a low voice. She says that what killed her parents wasn't malice, but accumulated neglect. A poorly maintained door, a faulty track, a sound that muffled a cry for help. She asks them to look at the details in their neighborhood. A burnt-out light in an alley, a gate that won't close, a loose manhole cover. When we fix these things, she says, we prevent what cannot be mended later. They take notes without bureaucracy and promise to check their own areas. That night, Cláudio visits the cemetery. He leans against the wall, not being one for words in front of a headstone. He gently straightens a tilted vase and wipes dust from the marble with his hand. The wind blows cold, and he remembers the concrete floor of the wing where his parents had lain, the chill that rises through your body when you sit on that ground. He promises himself to keep pushing the idea of checklists. He walks home with a steady gait, like someone who knows where he is stepping. December arrives with a steel-like heat. The street market gets louder. Fruits glisten with sweat. Children beg for sugarcane juice. An old man remarks that the market looks nice now. A woman replies that yes, it does. But what's important is not to forget why soon it was fixed. The phrase echoes through the corridors like a small reminder. On the preserved rectangle of floor, the late afternoon light draws a golden frame. Sonia walks past it, never on it, and thinks that the city, when it learns, becomes a better place to walk. It is the urban version of what Leonor taught with her needle and thread. A well-made seam is invisible. It simply holds. At home, the fan pushes hot air around. The radio plays an old song, and Sonia writes in a new notebook, this one also with a green cover by choice. It's not to imitate, but to continue. She jots down what she needs to buy, crosses items off forcefully when she returns from the market, and puts the folded list away. Claudio arrives with a bag of oranges. The peel releases a fresh scent into the air, a mix of childhood and now. They eat in a noisy silence, the juice running down their fingers, and in this simple act, for a few seconds, everything seems to fall back into alignment. The final movement of this story is not a grand one. It is made of short steps on a cobblestone street, of a drizzle that blows in sideways, of a new shopping cart that squeaks a little less each Saturday. The neighborhood has learned to live with the memory, without turning it into a monument. The market breathes, the door slides, and the track no longer sends anything where it shouldn't go. On the preserved rectangle of floor, the sun sometimes draws a picture that recalls a wheel and a path. Those who know recognize it. Those who don't simply walk around it naturally. This is how the city holds on to what matters in practice. Sônia and Cláudio have also learned to live with what cannot be undone. They don't look for signs, they look for routines. They plant, they cook, they fix a dripping faucet, they hang laundry when the wind is right. On Saturdays, the market calls them by name. The vendors save the prettiest oranges for her, the firmest tomatoes for him. Sometimes they buy sardines, sometimes they don't. The journey has become the important thing. Home, the corner, the school gate, the Portuguese mosaic, the bright corridor of the market, and back. It is a bond that doesn't constrict, it holds. The story, told calmly, leaves behind the temptation to invent fables. There was no secret closet, no conspiracy, no hidden villain. There was human error coupled with tired architecture and a noisy world that prevented a cry for help from reaching the right ears. When the door jammed, time inside that room stopped. Outside, it kept going. 19 years later, a creaking floorboard brought to light what was missing. A concrete place for memory. The rest is a silence that doesn't muffle. It accommodates. Today, the market has simple rules that work. Open and close with a method. Listen for different noises. Call for maintenance before it becomes news. The building once again serves those who need it, and this is a possible form of repair. The neighborhood, which once saw itself as helpless, has rediscovered its own capacity for care. None of this brings back that Saturday in 1998, but it prevents future Saturdays from closing on the same mistake. For Sônia and Cláudio, perhaps this is the exact measure between sorrow and peace. One late afternoon, Sônia enters the restored wing, alone. The light is cool, but the air circulates. She walks slowly to the rectangle of floor and whispers a thank you, which has no single recipient. It could be for her parents, for the one who opened the door, or for the city that finally learned. Then she returns home with a bag of bread and another of oranges, the smell of yeast and fresh peel mingling on the bus. Claudio is waiting for her at the gate. They have dinner, wash the dishes, close the windows, check the latches. Life goes on the right way. If you've made it this far, you appreciate real stories told with respect and rhythm. So take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. It makes a direct difference in our ability to continue careful investigations like this one. Share this video with someone who lives in the East Zone, who works in a market, who loves urban memory. It might help someone see their own neighborhood with new eyes. And when you're done, I invite you to watch our other videos. They are Brazilian cases told without exaggeration and with the same care. In Sonia's room, a new plant begins to climb the wall. On the radio, an old song that Leonor used to like is playing. The night falls clear without rain. The clock, now accurate, reads 6:15, and no one needs to rush. The neighborhood turns on its lights and closes its doors with attention. And the brick and iron building that once held too much now holds just enough. Wind circulating, whole voices, free steps.